Hello, everyone. Today we're going to step into a story that begins not with laughter or light, but with the heavy stillness of a funeral hall. Imagine this with me for a moment. The scent of white lilies drifting through the air, the somber sound of footsteps echoing against polished floors, and the subdued whispers of people who came to pay their respects. I sat there, dressed in black, my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring at the coffin of the man I had shared my life with for decades. My husband, my partner, my anchor, gone. The atmosphere pressed against me like a storm cloud that refused to break. My heart felt heavy, not just with grief, but with exhaustion. Every nod of sympathy, every gentle squeeze of my shoulder, reminded me of the role I had to play. The grieving widow, dignified, strong, composed. And for a while, I thought I could maintain that mask. But then it happened. As the minister's voice droned on with words of farewell, my sister leaned toward me. Her lips barely moved, her eyes fixed straight ahead, and in the softest whisper, she said words that cut deeper than any blade. Finally, he's gone. At that moment, the room seemed to freeze. The flickering candles looked like they were trembling, the air suddenly colder, and my blood turned to ice. I couldn't respond, not there, not in front of everyone. My heart hammered against my chest as I struggled to keep my face neutral, terrified that someone might see my shock. The funeral continued around me, people bowing their heads, dabbing their eyes, and murmuring prayers. But all I could hear were those words. Finally, he's gone. Not spoken with sorrow, not even indifference, but with a hint of relief, with a satisfaction that made me shudder. I wanted to ask her, what did she mean? Why would she say such a thing at such a sacred moment? But I couldn't. I was trapped, held hostage by the ceremony, unable to move, unable to speak. So I sat there in silence, every second dragging like an eternity, while a war began to rage inside me. Grief collided with suspicion, pain tangled with anger. I found myself replaying my sister's words again and again, searching for hidden meanings, imagining secrets I hadn't dared to consider before. Could it be jealousy? Hatred? Or something much darker? The funeral ended with the closing of the coffin, a sound so final it sent a tremor through my bones. People began to file out, their faces kind, their gestures sympathetic. But I was no longer seeing them. All I could see was my sister's face, composed, serene, as if she hadn't just shattered the ground beneath me with a single sentence. I knew in that moment that my life had changed forever. My husband's death was not the end of one story. It was the beginning of another. A story where love and loss would be tangled with betrayal, secrets, and a darkness I had never imagined. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time of day is it? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching and who is out there listening to me tonight. Because trust me, this story is one you'll want to follow until the end. The house was quiet after the funeral. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort you, but pressed down on your chest, heavy and suffocating. I sat in the living room, still wearing the black dress from earlier, staring at the framed photographs that lined the mantelpiece. Each picture showed a moment of happiness, a captured memory, birthdays, anniversaries, family gatherings, where my husband always had that warm smile that made everyone feel safe. But tonight, those same pictures looked like shadows of a world I no longer recognized. My heart was already fractured by grief, and yet it wasn't just sorrow that filled me. It was something sharper, a gnawing confusion that wouldn't leave me alone. Her words. Finally, he's gone. I whispered them aloud, and even in the emptiness of my home, the words made me shiver. My own sister, my blood, my family, had spoken them, and she hadn't sounded angry or broken. She'd sounded free. I closed my eyes and tried to recall every detail of that moment, the way her lips barely moved, the faint curl at the corner of her mouth, her tone not heavy with grief, but lightened, as though a burden had been lifted. For the 100th time that night, I wondered, what kind of hatred had she been carrying? It wasn't the first time I'd noticed tension between her and my husband. They were polite to each other at gatherings, civil enough in public. But there had always been an undercurrent, a stiffness in their voices, a refusal to meet each other's eyes too long. I'd always brushed it aside, convincing myself it was just personalities clashing, nothing more. But now I wasn't so sure. Grief makes you vulnerable. It makes your thoughts spiral in directions you never expected. Sitting in that lonely room, I felt myself pulled into a storm of memories. Times when she had declined invitations to dinner. Times when her smile toward him had looked just a little too forced. And times when I'd overheard her voice sharp with irritation when his name came up. Had I been blind all along? The door creaked slightly, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was my daughter, Emma, who had stayed the night after the funeral. She stepped into the room softly, her face pale but kind. She sat beside me, sliding her hand into mine. "Mom," she said gently, "you should try to rest." Rest. If only it were that easy. My body was exhausted, but my mind was wide awake, circling the same question like a predator stalking its prey. Why would my sister be glad that he was gone? I didn't tell Emma, not yet. How could I? What if it was all in my head? What if grief had twisted my perception, making me hear malice where there was none? And yet, deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Those words were real, they were sharp, and they carried a truth that my sister had been too careful to reveal until that moment. I decided to keep it to myself, for now, to watch, to listen, to remember. But a seed of suspicion had already been planted inside me, and it was growing fast. Later that night, when the house was dark and Emma had gone to bed, I stood alone at the kitchen window. The garden lay in silence, bathed in moonlight. It was a place my husband had loved, a place he found peace. And as I stared into the shadows, I realized something. Peace was the one thing I no longer had. Her whisper had stolen it from me, and I knew I wouldn't stop until I uncovered the truth. Sleep abandoned me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same moment. My sister's lips moving, the chilling whisper brushing my ear, the satisfaction in her voice. The funeral had ended, but the storm it left behind raged inside me. By dawn, my body was weak, my heart heavy, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the rising steam. The house felt haunted, not by spirits, but by memories. Every corner held pieces of him, his jacket still hanging by the door, the newspaper folded neatly on the armrest where he used to sit, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. Grief should have consumed me, yet suspicion gnawed at the edges of every memory. Why had she said it? What history had I missed? I began to drift backward in time, tracing the years of our lives. My sister and I had grown up close, or at least I believed we had. She was the protective older sibling, the one who stood up for me when I was shy, the one who dried my tears when I felt small. But when I married, things began to shift. She never said outright that she disliked my husband, but I could see it in her silence, the way her laughter dimmed when he entered a room. I remembered the first dinner where she and my husband truly clashed. It was nothing dramatic, just a disagreement about money. He believed in saving, investing, building. She believed life was for spending, enjoying before it slipped away. That night, she mocked his practicality, and he countered with quiet disdain for her recklessness. I thought little of it then, but looking back, maybe that was the spark of something much deeper. The years that followed only widened the distance. She would make excuses not to visit. When she did come, she offered thin smiles, hollow compliments. He never complained openly, but I caught the stiffness in his shoulders when she was around, the way he withdrew into silence. Two people I loved, caught in a cold war that I pretended not to see. And now she had revealed the truth, that his death wasn't just a loss to her, but a release. The thought burned. It twisted the grief in my chest into anger. I was startled by the sound of my phone buzzing across the table. It was a message from an old family friend, someone who had been at the funeral. "I know it's not the time," the message began, "but I thought you should know. Your sister spoke strangely after you left." Almost like she was glad. My hand tightened around the phone. It wasn't just me. Someone else had noticed. The words fueled my resolve. If she had carried resentment all these years, if she had buried secrets beneath polite smiles, then I had to uncover them, because grief was painful enough without betrayal hiding underneath. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in orange light, my sister arrived at my door. She carried a casserole dish, the universal symbol of sympathy. Her face was perfectly composed, her voice soft, her embrace warm. Anyone else would have believed her, but not me. Not anymore. Behind her kind gestures, I saw the shadow of the whisper. Behind her gentle words, I heard the echo of, "Finally, he's gone." And as I let her into my house, I knew I was letting a stranger in. A woman I thought I knew, but perhaps never truly did. The war inside me deepened, and though I smiled, though I said, "Thank you," I was already preparing myself. Preparing for the moment when silence would no longer protect her. The casserole sat untouched on the counter, its aroma filling the kitchen, but I couldn't bring myself to taste it. My sister moved around the room with practiced ease, as though she belonged here, as though she hadn't just shattered me with a single whispered sentence the day before. Her face wore the perfect mask, eyes lowered in grief, lips pressed together as if fighting back tears. To anyone else, she looked like a woman mourning beside her sister. But I had seen beneath that mask, if only for a second. I couldn't forget the faint lift at the corner of her mouth, the satisfaction that leaked through her whisper. I studied her quietly as she poured tea for us both. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, the way she had always been in social settings. She knew how to perform, but this time, I wasn't watching her performance as a sister. I was watching her as someone who might be hiding the truth. "Are you eating it all?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. She slid the teacup toward me and sat across the table, her eyes warm, sympathetic. "You need to take care of yourself. He wouldn't want you wasting away." I nodded slowly, my fingers brushing the porcelain cup but not lifting it. "I'm trying," I said softly, though my throat was tight. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. To anyone else, it would have looked like comfort, but I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my arm. Her hand was warm, but her eyes, they flickered, just for a second, but enough for me to see it. Something cold, something calculating. I remembered other moments when her mask had slipped. Years ago, at our parents' anniversary party, when my husband had taken the microphone to give a toast, I'd caught my sister rolling her eyes before she plastered on a smile. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Just impatience, maybe a moment of irritation. But now, with the memory sharpened by grief and suspicion, I realized it had been more. Resentment. My chest tightened as I realized I had ignored the signs for years. My sister had always known how to charm a room, how to wrap her words in silk, but her eyes told a different story, if only I had looked closer. "Do you remember?" she began suddenly, her tone soft and wistful. "The summer we spent at the lake house? You and him, always walking hand in hand, and me, always the third wheel." I froze. There it was, a glimpse of bitterness slipping into her voice. She caught herself quickly, forcing a smile. "I only mean that you two were so inseparable. It was sweet. You found your match, and I suppose I was just jealous of that kind of love." Jealous. The word echoed in my mind like a warning bell. I managed a faint smile, but inside, the questions twisted tighter. Was it just jealousy? Or had it been something deeper, something darker? Did she envy me, or did she despise him? She reached for her tea, sipping gracefully, her eyes lingering on me just a moment too long. It was the look of someone measuring, weighing, waiting. For the first time in my life, I realized I couldn't trust her. Not her words, not her gestures, not her grief. She was an actress on a stage, and I was her only audience. That night, after she left, I stood at the window again, staring out into the garden. The moonlight stretched across the lawn, shadows bending in unfamiliar ways. My heart ached for my husband, for the life we had built, but beneath the ache was something new. Resolve. I knew my sister's mask would slip again, and when it did, I would be ready. The days after the funeral blurred together, faces of mourners fading in and out, flowers arriving in waves, sympathy cards piling up on the table. I moved through it all like a ghost, thanking people, nodding at their words, but never truly hearing them. My mind was elsewhere, circling a single thought that refused to loosen its grip, my sister's whisper. It was when I began to sort through my husband's things that the first true cracks appeared. His study was a place I rarely entered. The scent of old books lingered, and the desk was still cluttered with papers, pens, and a half-finished crossword puzzle he'd left behind. My hands trembled as I touched his belongings, each item a fragment of the man who was no longer here. I opened drawers slowly, almost reverently, until I came across a stack of envelopes bound by a faded ribbon. Letters, some addressed to me, but others not. Curiosity overpowered grief. With a deep breath, I slid one free. The handwriting was familiar. My sister's. The words inside were sharp, though cloaked in politeness. Subtle criticisms of my husband, doubts about his intentions, comments about the way he controlled me. At first, I told myself it was concern, an older sister trying to protect her sibling. But as I read more, the letters shifted in tone. Her words dripped with disdain, painting him as arrogant, selfish, unworthy of my love. One letter in particular froze me. "You'll see one day," it read. "He isn't the man you think he is. When that day comes, you'll finally understand me." My breath caught in my throat. These weren't just words of jealousy or irritation. They were words of someone carrying a long, festering resentment. I sank into the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. All those years, I thought she was supportive in her quiet way. But she hadn't been supportive. She had been waiting. Waiting for me to discover what she believed was true. Waiting, perhaps, for his death to validate the bitterness she carried. As I set the letter down, I noticed something else tucked into the drawer. A small journal, leather-bound, worn at the edges. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't his style to keep diaries. But when I opened it, I found entries that chilled me further. They weren't written by my husband. They were notes he had kept. Notes about conversations with my sister. In his careful script, he recorded instances where she had made veiled remarks, questioned his choices, hinted at old grievances. "She will never forgive me," one entry said. "I don't know if it's about the past or simply who I am, but her eyes hold something I can't explain." I closed the journal slowly, my heart pounding. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me twisting grief into suspicion. The evidence was here, tangible, undeniable. My sister had harbored resentment for years, long enough for him to notice, long enough for him to record it. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if it might give me answers. Why? What had happened between them that had poisoned her so deeply? Had I missed something larger, something hidden from me all along? The knock on the front door startled me. I tucked the letters and journal back into the drawer, closing it quickly before heading to the entrance. It was her, my sister, standing there with another carefully practiced look of sorrow. She hugged me, her perfume filling my lungs, and whispered, "How are you holding up?" I held her just long enough to answer, "As well as can be expected." But inside, my chest tightened, because now, every word she spoke felt like another thread in a web I was only beginning to unravel. And I knew, I had to keep pulling. That evening, after she left, I sat in the quiet of the study, staring at the letters again. They felt like poison in my hands, each line written with a care that made the bitterness all the more deliberate. I tucked them back into the desk, but the words clung to me like smoke. I thought about the journal my husband had kept. He was not a man who wrote easily, He preferred numbers, facts, things he could prove. For him to take the time to write about her, to record his unease, meant he must have felt something profound, something dangerous. The next day, I received a call from one of my husband's oldest friends, a man named Richard. He had been at the funeral, but we hadn't spoken beyond a polite exchange. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "I don't know if I should say this," he began, "but I've always wondered if your sister carried more resentment toward your husband than she let on. Back in the early years, there were comments, little things she'd let slip when you weren't around." My breath caught. "What kind of things?" He hesitated again. "That he had stolen you away, that you deserved better. Sometimes she said it like a joke, but other times, it didn't feel like a joke." The room spun slightly as I clutched the phone. His words aligned perfectly with the letters, with the journal entries. It wasn't just in my head. Others had noticed too. Richard went quiet for a moment, then added softly, "I didn't want to burden you with this now, but maybe you should know." I thanked him, my voice steadier than I felt, and hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. When my sister arrived the next day, carrying flowers this time, I watched her closely. Every movement, every glance, every carefully chosen word felt like part of a performance. She asked after me, after Emma, after how I was sleeping. Her tone was soothing, but I couldn't ignore the flicker in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. I decided to test her. "Do you remember?" I asked casually. "The summer at the lake house. You mentioned it the other day." Her lips curved into a wistful smile. "Of course. You two were inseparable." I tilted my head. "Did it bother you, back then?" For a moment, just a heartbeat, her smile faltered. Her eyes darkened, a shadow passing across her face. Then, just as quickly, she laughed lightly. "Bother me? Number, I was happy for you. But I had seen it. That flash of something real, something raw. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered the house aimlessly, the letters and Richard's words swirling in my mind. Eventually, I found myself in the garden, standing under the stars. It was a place of comfort once, where my husband and I had shared countless evenings, talking, dreaming. But now, the air felt colder. The shadows seemed longer. I whispered his name into the night, as if he might answer, and for a moment, I swore I could feel his presence beside me, urging me to look deeper, to uncover what I had been blind to for so long. The truth was out there, hidden in the whispers of friends, in the lines of old letters, in the shadows of memories I hadn't dared to confront. And I realized then, grief had given me no choice but to search. Because if I ignored it, if I buried my head in sorrow, I would never know the full story of the man I lost, or the sister I thought I knew. The house had begun to feel like a stage. Every visit from my sister was another act, every gesture rehearsed, every word polished for effect. But when the curtain fell, when she thought no one was watching, the cracks began to show. It started small. Late one evening, as I was passing the hallway, I heard the faint hum of her voice. She was in the guest room, speaking softly on the phone. I paused, my breath held, straining to hear. "It's done now. Yes. Finally. She doesn't suspect a thing." The words froze me in place. My heart pounded in my ears as I leaned closer. Her voice lowered, too quiet to catch everything, but the tone was unmistakable, satisfied, calculated. The same tone as her whisper at the funeral. I stepped back quickly before she could notice me, retreating to my room. My hands trembled as I shut the door behind me. My mind raced with questions. Who was she talking to? What didn't I suspect? The next day, I tried to act normal, but every interaction felt heavy with unspoken truths. At breakfast, she asked about the bills, the estate, the legal matters that came with death. Her questions were framed as concern. "Do you need help sorting through the paperwork?" But her eyes were sharp, too curious. Later, I found her in my husband's study, standing by the desk. She smiled when I entered, holding one of his old pens. "I was just remembering him," she said softly. But I noticed the drawer was slightly open, the very drawer where I had hidden the letters. My chest tightened. I didn't confront her then. Instead, I watched. Over the following days, I began to notice more. The hushed phone calls behind closed doors, the way she lingered near my husband's things, the flicker of annoyance when I walked into a room too soon. She was leaving breadcrumbs, though she didn't know I was following. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, I decided to test her again. I mentioned casually that the lawyer had asked for all documents to be brought in, the journal, the letters, everything. Her teacup clattered slightly against its saucer. "That seems unnecessary," she said quickly. "You've been through enough. Maybe just let the past rest." Her voice was calm, but her fingers gripped the cup so tightly her knuckles whitened. It was in that moment I knew. She wasn't just resentful, she was afraid. The thought both terrified and emboldened me. Fear meant there was something to hide, something I hadn't uncovered yet. That night, when she retired early to her room, I sat awake in the living room, listening to the creaks of the house. Near midnight, I heard it again. Her voice, low, urgent, coming from behind the guest room door. "Don't worry. She believes me. It won't take long." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop the gasp that threatened to escape. This was no longer about grief. It was no longer about family tension or old resentments. This was something deeper, something darker. And though my hands trembled and my heart ached, one truth crystallized inside me. My sister was not just mourning with me. She was playing a game, and I was about to discover just how dangerous that game really was. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the dining room, golden and warm, but it didn't bring me comfort. I sat at the table, pretending to sip coffee, while my sister moved about the kitchen with that same calm efficiency she always carried. To anyone else, it would look like two grieving sisters trying to hold each other up in a time of loss. But beneath the surface, I felt the tension thrum between us like a wire pulled too tight. Her words from the night before clung to me. "She believes me. It won't take long." Believe what? Take long for what? I decided to tread carefully. Pushing too hard would only make her retreat further into her mask. Instead, I played along, asking about her health, her work, her plans. But I watched closely, and I saw it again. The way her eyes flickered whenever the conversation drifted toward money, the house, or the estate. Later that day, I received another visit, this time from one of my husband's old colleagues, a man named Harold. He offered condolences, then lingered, as though wrestling with something. Finally, he sighed. "I shouldn't say this, but your sister, she and your husband argued once, years ago, after a company dinner. He never told you?" I shook my head, my stomach twisting. Harold's face darkened. "It was about business, an investment gone wrong, if I remember correctly. She accused him of misleading her, of costing her money. It was ugly. I thought they made peace, but..." His voice trailed off. My mind reeled. Investment. Money. Could this be the root of her bitterness? When Harold left, I went straight to the study again, searching through old files. Hours passed as I flipped through papers until, at last, I found it. Documents from nearly 15 years ago, outlining a failed venture. The signatures were clear, my husband's and my sister's. They had gone into it together, and it had ended badly. I leaned back, the papers trembling in my hands. Was this it? The reason for her whisper? The reason she seemed relieved at his death? As I pieced it together, a darker picture began to form. Maybe it hadn't just been resentment over my marriage, or petty jealousy. Maybe it had been years of silent rage, fueled by financial ruin and pride. That evening, when she sat across from me at dinner, I studied her more intently than ever. She was charming, gentle, even playful at times with Emma, who had stopped by to visit. But when Emma left the table, I caught my sister watching me with an expression that sent a chill down my spine, an expression of someone who believed she was in control. I thought back to the letters, to the journal, to the phone calls I overheard. And now, with Harold's revelation, it all connected into something larger than simple family discord. This was betrayal. not just against my husband, but against me too. For all those years, she had smiled at me, hugged me, celebrated birthdays with me, all while carrying the venom of a ruined investment and blaming the man I loved for her losses. But what unsettled me most wasn't the past. It was the present. Because if she felt triumphant at his death, if she believed she had won something, then what was she planning now? That night, I locked the study drawer. I tucked the papers, the journal, and the letters deep inside, covering them with other documents. For the first time in years, I turned the key and pocketed it. I had uncovered part of the web, but I sensed there was more. Threads I hadn't yet seen, connections still hidden. And if I wanted the truth, I would have to follow them all, no matter where they led. Even if the truth destroyed what little family I had left. Rain tapped softly against the windows that night, as though the sky itself mourned. I sat alone in the study, the key to the locked drawer heavy in my pocket, while the weight of discovery pressed on my chest. The failed investment was one piece of the puzzle, yes, but it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the whisper at the funeral. It didn't explain the phone calls. It didn't explain the shadows flickering behind her carefully practiced smile. I spread the papers across the desk again, reading them more carefully this time. Contracts, signatures, numbers that no longer mattered, except for the anger they had bred. My husband had written notes in the margins, his script neat but weary. She blames me. She won't forgive. I closed my eyes and let the ink settle into my memory. He had known. He had carried this burden, maybe to protect me, maybe because he didn't want to fracture the fragile bond between sisters. But he had known. The next day, I received a call from the lawyer handling the estate. His voice was calm, professional, but the words struck me like lightning. "There's been some unusual interest in your husband's financial records. Someone requested copies of the estate documents earlier this week." My heart lurched. "Who?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Your sister." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. She wasn't just circling. She was moving in, weaving herself into matters that weren't hers. Or maybe she thought they were. That evening, I confronted her indirectly, watching her reaction. Over tea, I mentioned casually, "The lawyer called me today. Said there were requests for the estate files." Her cup froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes flickered before she forced a smile. "Oh, that? I was only trying to help. I thought you might be overwhelmed, so I asked for the documents. Nothing more." But her explanation rang hollow. I saw the tightening of her jaw, the faint tension in her voice. She wasn't helping. She was probing, searching for leverage. Later, when the house fell into silence, I slipped into the guest room she occupied. My hands trembled as I opened her bag, guilt and fear wrestling in my chest. Inside, I found more than I expected. Folders filled with copied documents, notes scribbled in her handwriting, even a draft of a statement claiming that my husband had manipulated her into financial ruin, painting herself as a victim. But one paper stopped me cold. It was a form, an early draft of a claim against the estate. Not just bitterness, not just resentment. She was planning to take legal action, to carve out a piece of the life my husband and I had built together. I stuffed the papers back quickly and left the room, my breath ragged. The betrayal had grown teeth. It wasn't just whispers or hidden resentment. It was action, a calculated attempt to strip away what remained of my security, my future, my peace. When she emerged the next morning, her smile was as bright as ever, her words dripping with sympathy. "How did you sleep?" she asked, as though she hadn't been plotting my undoing under the same roof. I stared at her, my heart heavy with the knowledge I carried. She thought she was winning. She thought I was blind. But I wasn't blind anymore. The evidence was clear, undeniable, and now I knew exactly what I was up against. Still, the question burned inside me. If she was willing to betray me in death, what had she done while my husband was still alive? The answer, I feared, would cut deeper than anything I had uncovered so far. The following days felt like walking through a minefield, every conversation with my sister laced with danger. I answered her questions with careful neutrality, never revealing what I knew. Yet inside, my chest burned with fury. She was trying to dismantle everything my husband and I had built, piece by piece, under the guise of family concern. But betrayal never remains hidden forever. It leaves traces. It was during a meeting with the lawyer that the next thread unraveled. He placed a folder on the desk, his expression tense. "I need you to see this," he said. Inside were financial records, transfers, withdrawals, payments. Some were legitimate, tied to my husband's business and investments. But others led to accounts I had never seen before. And one name appeared again and again. My sister's. Shock coursed through me. These were made while he was alive? The lawyer nodded gravely. Some were disguised as loans, others as gifts. But the amounts, the timing, it suggests manipulation. This wasn't generosity, this was pressure. My husband, giving her money, covering debts. And all the while, she whispered poison behind his back, resentful even as she drained him. I left the office with the folder clutched tightly against me, the weight of the truth almost unbearable. It wasn't just bitterness over an old investment. It wasn't just jealousy. It was greed. Years of it. Quiet, steady, relentless. That night, I sat across from her at dinner, the documents burning in my mind. She laughed lightly at some story Emma told, her face glowing with the practiced warmth of a doting aunt. But all I could see were the numbers, the withdrawals, the transfers, the evidence of her betrayal carved into bank statements. When Emma left the room, I leaned forward and said softly, "You know, he always believed in family, even when it hurt him." Her smile faltered, just a fraction before she recovered. "He was a good man," she replied smoothly. I held her gaze. "Yes, too good sometimes." The silence that followed was thick, charged with words unspoken. Her eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not grief, not sorrow, but calculation. She knew I was close to the truth. The days that followed only deepened the fractures. My daughter, Emma, began to notice the tension. She pulled me aside one afternoon, her young face creased with worry. "Mom, why do you and Auntie keep looking at each other like that? It's scary." I hugged her tightly, whispering, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll keep you safe." But inside, I wondered, safe from what? From betrayal? From manipulation? From the very person who should have been family? The family itself was splintering. Cousins whispered. Old friends began to take sides, rumors spreading like wildfire. Some believed my sister's quiet narrative, that she had been wronged, that my husband had taken advantage of her. Others stayed silent, unwilling to be caught in the storm. I watched it all unfold with a heavy heart. The man I had loved, the life we had built, was being rewritten by lies. And the woman rewriting it was my own sister. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. The evidence was in my hands, and I knew that sooner or later, the mask she wore so carefully would fall. The only question was whether I'd be ready for what I saw underneath. The air in the house grew heavier with each passing day, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My sister still lingered around me, offering tea, folding laundry, arranging flowers, gestures that looked tender to anyone else. But I knew better. Behind her, every move lay intent. And I was tired of pretending. The confrontation came one evening, unplanned, but inevitable. We were sitting in the living room, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across her face. She was flipping through a photo album, tracing her finger along pictures of birthdays and holidays. For a fleeting moment, I almost believed the softness in her eyes. But then I remembered the letters, the financial records, the phone calls whispered behind closed doors. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why did you say it?" My voice was quiet but sharp, cutting through the silence. She looked up, startled. "Say what?" "At the funeral." My throat tightened. "You whispered, 'Finally, he's gone.'" The room froze. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she closed the album slowly, her hands deliberate, her expression unreadable. You misheard, she said at last, her tone measured. No. I leaned forward, my eyes burning into hers. I heard you, and I've seen the letters. I know about the money, the lies, the resentment you carried all these years, so don't tell me I misheard. Her mask cracked. Just a flicker, but enough. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing with something colder than denial. You don't understand, she said finally. Her voice trembled, but not with grief, more with suppressed fury. Do you have any idea what he did to me? How he ruined me? My breath caught. Ruined you? He helped you. He gave you money, covered your debts. Money he owed me, she snapped, her composure unraveling. He destroyed my chance at stability years ago, and then he used his generosity to make me look ungrateful, to make me dependent. Don't you see? He always wanted control, even over me. I stared at her, stunned by the venom in her words. This wasn't sorrow. This wasn't love twisted by grief. This was hatred, sharpened over decades until it gleamed like a blade. You hated him, I whispered. Her silence was answer enough. The tears burned hot in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. And what about me? Did you ever care how this would hurt me? Did you ever think of me at all? She leaned back, her gaze steady now, cold. You chose him. Every day, you chose him over me. Maybe now you'll finally see who he really was. The words cut deeper than any knife, because in that moment, I realized something devastating. My sister didn't just despise my husband, she despised the part of me that loved him. I rose from my chair, trembling, my voice breaking as I said, Leave. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't protest. She closed the photo album, set it aside, and stood. One day, you'll thank me for opening your eyes, she said softly, almost kindly. Then she walked out, her footsteps echoing through the hall until the door shut behind her. The house was silent once more, but the silence was different now. Not heavy with grief, but hollow, empty. Because I knew the truth, and knowing it was worse than any whisper. My sister was no longer my ally. She was my enemy. The door had barely closed behind her when I sank into the armchair, my whole body trembling. The confrontation had left me raw, shaken in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I had clung to the idea that beneath her bitterness, beneath her sharp words, she was still my sister. But now the illusion was gone. The mask had shattered. Her hatred was no longer a shadow. It was alive, breathing, sitting across from me in the quiet of my home. I stared at the photo album she had left behind. My hands hovered over it before finally opening its cover. Each page was filled with smiles, captured moments of joy. Me blowing out candles, my husband laughing, her standing beside us with that familiar, practiced grin. But looking now, I saw it. The stiffness in her shoulders, the coldness hidden in her eyes. She had always been performing, even back then. I felt sick. How much of my life had been built on lies I never saw. In the days that followed, she kept her distance. She no longer dropped by unannounced, no longer lingered in the hallways of my home. But that absence wasn't peace. It was the quiet before a storm. I could feel it. My gut told me she was plotting, preparing. And I was right. The lawyer called again, his voice urgent this time. She's filed a petition, he said. She's claiming part of the estate, citing financial damages from past dealings with your husband. It's aggressive. The words sent a jolt through me. I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles white. So she wasn't bluffing, I murmured. No, the lawyer replied. She's serious, and if she can sway the court with her narrative, she could cause you significant trouble. Anger surged through me, hot and blinding. It wasn't enough for her to despise him in life. It wasn't enough for her to whisper relief at his death. Now she wanted to dismantle his legacy, to tear apart what little remained of the life we built. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of letters and financial documents spread before me, Emma entered. She looked at me with concern, her young face weary from grief, but still searching for hope. Mom, she said quietly, Is Auntie coming back? I hesitated. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to answer honestly. No, sweetheart, not like before. Emma's eyes welled with tears. But she's family. I swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes family can hurt us more than strangers. And sometimes we have to protect ourselves, even from the people we love. She leaned against me, her small frame trembling, and I held her close. In that moment, I knew this fight wasn't just about money or reputation. It was about protecting Emma from the poison my sister carried. The next day, I met with the lawyer again, determined to defend what was mine. We gathered the evidence, the letters, the journal, the records of money taken under false pretenses. Piece by piece, the story came together, not just of a bitter sister, but of a woman consumed by greed. And yet, even as I armed myself with proof, I couldn't shake the dread coiling in my stomach. Because evidence alone doesn't stop someone driven by hatred. As I walked home that evening, the sky heavy with clouds, I realized something chilling. My sister wasn't simply fighting for money. She was fighting to rewrite history, to paint herself as the victim, to tarnish my husband's name, to make me doubt the very love I had lived my life around. This wasn't just greed. It was war. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the cost of fighting it. The word war echoed in my head as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. My husband's death should have been the hardest battle of my life, learning to live without him, finding my footing in a world that suddenly felt empty. But now, I was fighting something far darker. Betrayal wrapped in family ties, sharpened by greed, and fueled by decades of resentment. By morning, my resolve hardened. I couldn't allow her to twist the truth, not while I still had the strength to stand. I gathered the documents, the letters, the journal, the financial records, and spread them across the dining table. Each piece of paper was a weapon, proof of her manipulation, her lies. I studied them carefully, memorizing the timeline, preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation in court. But when I looked in the mirror that afternoon, I saw someone I barely recognized. My face was thinner, my eyes sunken, my shoulders tense with weeks of strain. Grief had already carved its scars into me. This battle threatened to finish the job. That's when the phone rang. My lawyer's voice was steady, but the words cut me deeply. She isn't backing down. In fact, she's escalating. She's claiming your husband left her out of guilt, that the money he gave her was repayment for wrongdoing. Wrongdoing. The word tasted bitter. She was twisting everything, taking his kindness, and turning it into evidence against him. It was more than betrayal. It was desecration. She was dragging his memory through the mud, and I could almost feel him beside me, silent but wounded by the lies. I slammed the phone down and buried my face in my hands. Tears came hot and unrelenting. But beneath the grief, a new fire burned. If she wanted war, then I would give her one. That evening, I called Emma to the table. She sat across from me, her face worried. "Mom, what's happening?" I reached for her hand. "Your aunt is trying to take what doesn't belong to her. She wants to rewrite history, but we won't let her." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But she's family." "Family," I said quietly, "isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, about love. And sometimes, the people we call family can hurt us worse than anyone else." She nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "What if she wins?" I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll still have each other. That's something she can never take away." But in my heart, I knew the cost would be greater than either of us could imagine. The confrontation came sooner than expected. My sister arrived at the house the next day, uninvited. She stood in the doorway, her expression calm, but her eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "We don't have to fight," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "If you agree to share what's left, I'll withdraw the petition. We can end this quietly, without shame." I stared at her, my voice shaking but firm. "Shame doesn't come from me, it comes from you." Her smile faltered, then hardened. "Don't be naive. Do you think people will believe your side over mine? I'm already telling them what kind of man he really was. My breath caught. She wasn't just threatening money. She was threatening legacy, reputation, memory. Something in me snapped then. "Get out," I said, my voice low but steady. "Get out of my house." For the first time, I saw her mask truly slip. The softness disappeared, replaced by raw contempt. "You've always been weak," she hissed. "That's why he could control you, and it's why I'll win." Her words echoed as the door slammed behind her, leaving me trembling in the silence. It was the breaking point. The moment I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about truth, and I would not let her bury it. The house seemed different after that confrontation. Emptier, colder, as though her presence had poisoned the air itself. I walked through the rooms, touching the back of the chair where my husband used to sit, running my hand along the mantel where his laughter had once echoed. Every object carried memory, but every memory now felt threatened by her lies. The next week blurred into a storm of legal meetings, whispered conversations with family members, and sleepless nights. Word spread quickly, whispers in the community, neighbors glancing at me with pity, old friends calling hesitantly, unsure what to believe. Some had already heard her version of events, carefully spun into a tale of injustice. She painted herself as the wounded victim, robbed of stability by a man who had wronged her. And in their silence, I could feel the doubt. I fought back with everything I had. I showed the lawyer the letters, the journal, the records of money he had given her. Each piece of evidence strengthened my case, yet the weight of the battle grew heavier each day. Because evidence proves facts, but lies, repeated often enough, begin to sound like truth. Emma noticed the toll it was taking. One evening, she came into the study, her eyes red with tears. "Mom, why is she doing this? Doesn't she know we're hurting too?" I pulled her close, smoothing her hair. "Some people's pain twists them, sweetheart. It makes them want to hurt others instead of healing." "But she's your sister," Emma whispered. "How can family do that?" I swallowed hard, the answer bitter on my tongue. Because sometimes the people closest to us carry the deepest resentments. The legal battle escalated. Documents were filed, accusations exchanged. She attacked not just my husband's memory, but me as well, calling me blind, manipulated, a woman who had wasted her life defending a man unworthy of it. Each word was a knife, twisting deeper into wounds that had barely begun to heal. But amid the pain, there were moments of strength. Friends who had known us for years stood by me, refusing to believe her lies. The lawyer assured me that truth had weight, that evidence would hold. And in those fragile moments of hope, I felt my husband's presence like a steady hand on my shoulder, urging me not to give up. Then came the family gathering. A meeting meant to discuss things peacefully. Reluctantly, I attended. Relatives filled the room, their faces tense, eyes darting between us. She arrived in black, still playing the part of the grieving sister, her voice soft, her words dripping with sorrow. But when she spoke, the mask slipped again. "He ruined me," she declared, her voice rising. "He destroyed my chance at a future, and now she clings to what's left, pretending he was a saint." I stood, my voice shaking but firm. "He was not perfect, none of us are, but he was kind, generous, and your hatred blinded you to that. You've twisted his love into cruelty because it suits your story." The room fell silent. Some avoided my gaze, unwilling to take sides. Others whispered. She glared at me, her mask fully gone, her expression raw with venom. "Then let the courts decide," she spat. And with that, the meeting ended in chaos. As I walked home that night, the weight of it all pressed down on me. The family was fractured beyond repair. The bonds that had once held us together now lay in ruins, burned by greed and bitterness. I paused at the garden gate, staring at the flowers my husband had planted years ago. Their petals glistened with dew under the moonlight, fragile but still alive. And I realized then, no matter how much she tried to destroy, some things, love, memory, resilience, could never truly be taken. The battle wasn't over, but I was no longer afraid, because I knew who I was, and I knew who she had become. The storm that had consumed my days and nights finally began to settle. The hearings concluded, the accusations exhausted, the evidence laid bare. My sister's petition was dismissed, the lies she had spun unraveling under the weight of truth. Yet victory brought no joy, only a hollow ache. The house was quiet once more. Not the suffocating silence of grief, nor the tense silence of suspicion, but something softer. I walked slowly through the rooms, trailing my fingers along the familiar furniture, letting the memories wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to feel the weight of both sorrow and relief. I moved into the garden at dusk, where the last light of day lingered on the petals my husband had planted years ago. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth after rain. I closed my eyes and listened, not for whispers of betrayal, not for the heavy tread of legal battles, but for the gentle hum of life continuing. My sister's absence left a void, yes, but it was a void that no longer frightened me. Her whisper at the funeral, "Finally he's gone," had haunted me, but now it felt distant, like a shadow fading at sunrise. Her hatred, her greed, her bitterness, they were her burdens, not mine. Emma joined me in the garden, her hand slipping into mine. Her presence was a reminder that though family can fracture, love can endure. She looked up at me with quiet strength. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked. I smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. "As over as it will ever be." We stood together, watching the sky deepen into shades of lavender and gold. Time seemed to slow, the edges of the world softening. The pain was still there. Grief never leaves entirely, but it was gentler now, folded into memory. I whispered a farewell into the evening air, not just to my husband, but to the illusions I had carried, to the sister I thought I knew, to the battles that had nearly consumed me. My voice was quiet, carried away by the breeze, but in that whisper was peace. The garden lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the flowers. The night descended slowly, wrapping the world in a blanket of calm. I let my shoulders relax, let my breath steady, and for the first time in months, I felt something like freedom. As the stars began to pierce the dark sky, I knew my story wasn't ending here. Life would continue, fragile, imperfect, beautiful. My husband's memory would live on, not tarnished by lies, but cherished in truth. And though my sister's shadow would always linger at the edge of my past, it no longer held power over my future. So I closed my eyes, whispered goodbye one last time, and let the night carry it away. Thank you for reading the whole story. Hope you will support my next products.